And then let us turn to Genesis 1. We will have a theme which we get also from the Belgic Confessions, Article 12. And the theme is of how God created the physical world. Of course, God also created the spiritual world. But that will be for another time. So we first look again at some basic truths of how God created the physical world. Genesis 1, verse 1, and I will read not just verse 5 and then jump to 26. I will read to verse from 1 to 27. Genesis 1, verse 1 says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." My brother and sister, while we are in verse 1, in the sermon I'm going to refer to some translations who have made a gap towards evolution or towards the point that God did not create out of nothing. So they, instead of saying what we have just heard, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, they say in the beginning when God created the heavens and earth. The earth, which was already there before God created, was formless. Wow, how can one do that? So verse 2 says, "The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Then God said, 'Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters.' God made the expanse and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. Then God said, 'Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear.' And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters He called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, 'Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind.'" And there's another point we're going to look at, after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, again after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them, after their kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind. Again, the word kind. and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. There was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. Then God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us, and again we are going to focus on the word us, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. And we will hear that again. It's his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Thus far, our reading from God's word. Congregation of our Lord Jesus Christ, when I was 18 and 19 years old, I was doing my military conscription year in the South African Army. Then about 2 years later, when I was a student at varsity, the so-called guerrilla bush wars broke out on South Africa's northern borders. So, having not too long before completed my military training, there was the real possibility that I could be called up for a 3-month period of service. Normally, such a 3-month period would extend over the long summer holidays. Well, it was at that stage that my father's greatest fear was that, having been born and bred into city life, and being right in the middle of university studies, being busy with books, would cause me to make mistakes in the bush. For example, that as I would be walking in the bush and suddenly stumble upon an object of culture, like, for example, a ballpoint pen that might be lying in the grass, I would cleanly forget that this ballpoint pen is displaced. It's not supposed to be here in the African bush. For this is bush area. And in bush as vast as the African bush, you don't just pick up a ballpoint pen behind every bush. Why? Well, because whereas bush was not made by man, ballpoint pens were indeed made by man. So if you found a ballpoint pen in the bush, it must have been brought there by man. And therefore it could well be that the enemy, my enemy, had lost it there, or deliberately placed this ballpoint pen in the bush, and that the enemy is at that very moment watching me from a very well camouflaged position. Now, lots of intriguing stories could be made up about such a scenario, but here is the point I want to make, and that is that if you find a ballpoint pen in vast bush, the contrast between non-man-made environment and that man-made pen will be so clear that neither you nor your fellow troops will argue against the fact that that pen was made by man. That it's a product of culture with intelligent design in that pen, however basic the intelligent design. My brother and sister, this is just an illustration to say that the person who is honest with him or herself will, when looking at this world, with all its animals, with all its birds, its fish, its human beings, its rocks, its plants, its water, its oxygen, its sunlight, and with its progression of time, such an honest person will have to acknowledge that all these things must have been designed and created by someone far greater and more intelligent than you and I. Just as clearly as they would know that that pen was made by man, so clearly should every human being here on earth understand that all things were made by an intelligent designer, by God. And I would be surprised, actually I would be shocked if everyone in our church would not agree with this basic fact. For although nowadays many people, some of them even intelligent people, don't believe in a creator God, nevertheless, many who are not even of the Christian faith still have the common sense of which Romans 1 verse 20 speaks, and that is to believe that a tremendously intelligent being must have created the universe. But now, the fact that an intelligent being, even God, created the universe, that's not a problem for many. But what is a problem for some, even for some who call themselves Christian, is some basic truths of how God made the universe. Thus, this sermon wants to describe what the first half of Article 12 of the Belgic Confession of Faith says, and I will quote that as we go through the sermon. What the Belgic Article 12 says about what the Bible reveals regarding how the creation of the physical world took place. Yes, you and I can only consider the first half of Article 12. The second half, the part of the creation of the angels, we hope to look at another time. So then, regarding the how of the creation of the physical world, this sermon has 3 points. God triune. Secondly, out of nothing. Thirdly, different kinds. Now, I must straight away say that I am not a creation scientist. I wish I was one. I wish I was an expert on that topic, but I am not. So like the Belgic Confession's Article 12, I am approaching the Genesis account of creation from a Hebrew language position, as well as a theological point of view, not from an archaeological or a natural science approach. Well, here is point 1. Who created? God triune. My brother and sister, Genesis 1 verse 1 reads, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Then verse 2 says, "And the Spirit of God was moving," or was hovering. And the idea is that the Spirit of God was hovering in a caring and creating fashion over the surface of the waters. And so we see that Genesis 1 mentions God and the Spirit of God in creating capacity. Well, some people who are against the fact that God is a triune God, for example, Judaists, They wanted to remove the word spirit from this verse, so they translated the word spirit with wind, with the result that this verse then would read, a wind from God was sweeping over the water. How shocking. But this is how the New Jewish Version reads Genesis 1 verse 2. Now granted, the Hebrew word for spirit, the word ruach, can indeed also mean wind. However, showing how desperately those people pushed their agenda, Reformed scholars have made a study of all the instances right through the Hebrew Old Testament text where the word spirit or wind directly precedes the word God. In other words, where the words stand in combination. And did you know what their finding was? Well, they found that nowhere in the Hebrew Old Testament, where the Hebrew word spirit directly precedes the Hebrew word God, does this word mean wind of God, but only ever Spirit of God. And so without a doubt, Genesis 1 verse 2 can only mean, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, hovering over the uninhabited earth, ready to carry out the divine decree. But also other parts of the Bible tell us that the Holy Spirit was active in God's working. So, for example, Job 26, verse 13. It says, by His Spirit, the skies became fair. Psalm 104, verse 30. When you send forth your Spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Then, of course, there are quite a few passages telling us that the Son, the second person in the Trinity, was also active in creation. John 1, verse 2 to 3. He, that is the Word, that is Christ. Christ was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Colossians 1 verse 16. For by Him, by Christ, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Christ and for Christ. Hebrews 1 verse 2. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed the heir of all things, through whom also He created the world. My brother and sister, it's clear, God triune created the universe. This is also supported by what God says in Genesis 1 verse 26. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. What comfort does this knowledge give you and me? This knowledge that God triune has created the universe, not just the Father. Well, is it not so that this knowledge makes you and me stand in awe of God, the only true God, who, although three persons in one Godhead, constantly work together in peace, in harmony, in unity, in love, and that so that you and I could be created as products of this mind-bending love relationship. What's more, Does not this knowledge also raise your and my esteem of Christ and of the Holy Spirit? So we understand also them to be eternal, almighty, and having all the attributes of God. And so we are not thinking like the Jehovah's Witnesses about Christ and about the Spirit, that they are somehow divine, but they're not really on the level of God. So don't you and I just want to praise God, God triune? So far regarding the first point, God triune created. How else did God create? That brings us to point 2, out of nothing. Genesis 1 verse 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Do you know what some Bible versions, even some respected Bible versions like the NRSV, have done with this verse? They don't say in the beginning God created. No, they say in the beginning when God created. Why did they translate this way? Well, because some of these Bible versions were edited by liberal theologians who found all things that are supernatural in the Bible, as they find it, like Genesis 1 through to 11, very hard to swallow. They find it to be myths, which only in some ways conveys religious truth. So someone might ask, but what is so wrong in translating in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void? My brother and sister, this kind of translation had its origin in the hidden agenda of the liberals, some of whom are theistic evolutionists. In other words, people who believe in God, that's why we call them theistic, but believing that God created the world by means of evolution. So these liberals and theistic evolutionists don't want to believe that God created all things out of nothing. Thus, by translating in the beginning, when God created, the earth was formless, these liberals have brought the Bible in sync with their own views. That when God created, some stuff had already been lying around. Stuff or material which God did not create, which had been there from eternity past. Thus, these liberal scholars have now not only doubted God's powerful creating ability, that he can create out of nothing, but they have now also put eternal matter on a par with God. Matter was there before God created, so matter must be like God. Wow. And that's why they say, in the beginning, they changed from in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, to in the beginning, when God created the heavens and earth. And the shocking thing is that even modern, respected translations, which have found the consensus of the wider Old Testament academic scholarship, translations like the New English Bible and the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, have adopted this wrong way of translating Genesis 1 verse 1. But it goes further, just as some of these liberal versions have done when they replaced Spirit of God with Wind of God in Genesis 1 verse 2. So have they also in this case pushed the Hebrew language's rules to the extreme limits so that they could arrive at such a weird translation. And thus, beyond the limits of Hebrew language rules, these scholars have pushed the translation of the first words from "in the beginning God created" to "in the beginning when God created." In a similar way, have they also pushed their case for the meaning of the Hebrew word "to create." In Hebrew, it is the word bara, to create. For yes, although it cannot be proved that this word always only expresses creating out of nothing, it is also true that nowhere else in the Bible where this word is used is any material mentioned from which God created. Only the end product of the creating activity is mentioned. Besides, this word bara, to create, is only ever used of God as the doer, as the creator. The Hebrew Old Testament never uses this word for human beings or animals making, or as we say in modern English, creating a beautiful piece of art. Never do they use man as the doer of that verb. Thus, the Belgics Article 12 is biblically correct when it says, "We believe that the Father, through the Word, that is through His Son, has created out of nothing heaven and earth and all creatures when it seemed good to Him." Yes, indeed, the Belgic Confession got its confession from the Bible. Now, if any skeptic anywhere in the world who has listened to the aforementioned argument still refuses to believe that God created out of nothing, then God has taken care of it by giving us one final verse. Hebrews 11, verse 3. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. It's clear. Now, a critic might say, well, you say that it's by faith. It's not by science. By faith we understand that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Although many good arguments could be and are being given from the Bible, my brother and sister, it is ultimately by faith that you and I and anyone else will get this awe-inspiring insight. By receiving God triune by His grace through faith in Jesus Christ, Christ who is the expression of God's love, only by this way, a God-worked faith, will you and I have the truth. Well, what does it mean to you and me that God has created all things out of nothing? Just by His spoken word. Well, does this amazing knowledge not instill in your heart the greatest certainty and comfort and assurance that you are safe in the hands of an all-powerful God? One who has created the universe out of nothing? And can you and I therefore not take comfort that everything that happens with us happens not without His knowledge? So all things happening to us must be by His wise plan and for our eternal good. Well, that was point 2, creating out of nothing. Here's the last point, different kinds. My brother and sister, the fact that God created all creatures in their different kinds, that was never an issue until the theory of evolution became popular. It is now common knowledge that Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859. In that book, having observed many different life forms, Darwin tried to explain that all life forms came about through the process of natural selection. By this, Darwin means that the weak members of each species naturally tend to die off because they're weak. And the strong survive by adapting to their surroundings. Darwin did not try to explain the origin of life or the origin of this planet. Neither did he write his book to try and prove the creation account in Genesis 1 wrong. However, Darwin's ideas laid the foundation for the theory of evolution. Modern evolutionists believe, among others, that creatures have evolved across species. And so, in opposition to these beliefs, the humoristic phrase, from goo to you via the zoo, has evolved. So, some 300 years before the theory of evolution was known, Guido de Brès, who wrote the Belgic Confessions, Article 12, says, and that he, God, has given to every creature its being, shape, and form, and to each its specific task and function to serve its Creator. Of course, Guido de Brès received this knowledge from the Bible. Genesis 1 verse 11 says about the plants, and we have read it. Let the earth spout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. And in Genesis 1, verse 24 and 25, it says about the animals, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth, again according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And again, in the same verse, we hear again, according to their kinds. And we hear it a fourth or a fifth time, according to its kind. And God saw it was good. My brother and sister, the Hebrew word for kind is a word that sounds mean. It's M-I-N, mean. Now, this word has no dubiousness whatsoever about it. It's simple and it's plain. It just means kind or species. And Genesis 1 consistently uses this word, the word kind, in the singular. In other words, kind, not kinds. Then in Genesis 1, verse 26, the creation of man is clearly described as a separate event. Man did not evolve out of plants or animals. Thus, based upon the Bible, you and I believe that life did not begin as a single primordial cell from which all other life forms developed. God created the original kinds with the ability to diversify in cultivars, breeds, and races. Like, for example, we see in plants, we see that in animals, just in my dog. For example, a schnauzer, which did not exist in Genesis 1, verse 1, but he could have been formed because he's a breed. We also see this in human beings, in races. My brother and sister, think how many different kinds of created things and beings are there. Have you counted them? Has anyone, any human being ever counted them? What does it mean to you that God has created everything according to its kind? Does it not bring you and me on our knees in awe of the capacity of God's mind, of God's intellect, that He could create billions and billions of stars, plant and animal species, and man, and not to mention the insects and the bacteria, and He knows them all by name. Yes, no one is unknown to Him. Look, is this not why Guido de Brès has finished this part of Article 12 by saying, we believe that God also continues to sustain and govern them according to His eternal providence and by His infinite power in order to serve man to the end that man may serve his God. My brother and sister, looking at the mind-bending creation feat of God Triune, is that not enough to lift your and my hearts and minds up beyond selfish preferences and petty debates in order to marvel at the power, at the freedom and grandeur of what God has done in creating all things through His Son and Spirit? I conclude with the words of Psalm 104, verse 24 and 31. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in His works. Amen.